Words About Books is a poorly spoken podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Poppy War. Today we're going to be covering part 2 of that book. If you haven't already, I would suggest you go back and both read and listen to part 1 so that this actually makes sense. 2 weeks from now we'll be doing part 3, and the next book we're going to cover is Make Love the Bruce Campbell Way. Part 2 begins on a Muganese ship. It's told from the perspective of a man who we quickly learn is a shaman. He has the ability to not just blend into the shadows, but become part of the shadow. He has been hiding there for many days on the direct order of the Empress. He doesn't know why he's there exactly, only that he would know what to do when he gets a signal. Finally, something strange is happening. He sees another boat approach, so he moves to the deck to figure out what this other ship is, and he learns that the Empress herself is here on the ship. She spots him immediately, and she says, "Good, you're in position." He takes this as his sign to emerge from the shadow and kill his way through the ship. But he stares into the Empress's eyes, and he falls into a deep trance, and that is the end of him.
So this is really the first look we've ever had at a shaman using their powers in a tactical situation. And the fact that the Empress knows he's there and that the Empress is employing shaman is new information to us.
There are 13 battalions, one for each of the provinces, except the 13th is made up of shamans, with the idea of they're too powerful to be in any of the other battalions, or they would tip the scales into any one warlord's favor. So the Empress directly controls them, and I think they mentioned that the shaman in this division are used almost exclusively for domestic use. It's implied that she uses them to eliminate political dissidents.
Yeah, they're used almost as not even the FBI, they're used almost like an SS. One thing I want to ask you, because this is where things start to go off the rails for me. Do you think that the fact that there is this 13th division that is under the direct control of the Empress that all the other warlords know about, does that really jive with what we were told in part 1? Like, how many people do you think know about shaman?
Yeah, that doesn't really make sense, because most people think that it's all superstitious garbage. They think that probably they're real, but they're religious figureheads or spiritual figureheads. They don't actually command gods or magic.
Yeah, I was a little confused. There's almost a tone shift between part 1 and part 2. It's not a bad tone shift, but it's a little abrupt in that she goes from learning about this wider world to a ton of people know about the wider world. Like, Rin asks the question in part 1, why isn't every student trained in this? And Zhang says, because it's this deep spiritual experience that you have to have for yourself. Oh, and then here's my hit squad of shaman. Like, if it seems jarring in the way we're describing it, that's because it's a little jarring that not only is there a shaman on this boat, the Empress has power as well. So it was kind of foreshadowed. And yeah, the Empress is working with Mugen, so interesting.
The next chapter, Rin is still studying at Seingard, but war is brewing. The Muganese emperor passes away, and his son ascends to the throne. His son is very pro-war, and And Hesperia, I mean, you can only care about another nation for so long before you kind of get bored and stop bothering.
Ness,
So Hesperia's...
Do you, like, work in foreign policy? I mean, man,
as a matter of fact.
Yeah, like, the State Department could use you.
So Hesperia's out. There's nothing stopping Mugen from going to war except for a reason. And a reason finally arises when...
So this is actually based on something that did happen.
Is this the Marco Polo Bridge incident?
I think so, yes. So what happens is, I forget how exactly it goes in real life, but tensions are high. Armies are starting to push into places where they're not supposed to push into. And there was a conflict in real life in Manchuria. The Japanese were starting to push towards China a little too aggressively. And the armies were sort of camped across from each other, and a soldier went missing from the Japanese side. And the Japanese demanded to search the Chinese camp, and it turned into a whole big thing. And I think it turned into the basis for escalating the conflict, because they said, you killed our soldier, and they said, no, we didn't, and you need to get the fuck out of our camp, and it turned into a whole big thing. Turns out, like, the soldier was at a brothel or something. like he turned up. He was found, but it was too late. Like, the same sort of conflict plays out in this book, where the Mugen army and the Nikara army on the northern front are camped near each other. A soldier goes missing. The Mugen blame the Nikara claim innocence, and it escalates the conflict.
Now, what I didn't understand was where exactly the Mugenese were on the mainland, because as you said, in the real world, Japan had Manchuria, which is directly connected. It's a part of China now. It was part of China before it was annexed. So Japan had a state on the mainland. I didn't think there was a state for Mugen in this book.
I think there is. I don't know if it's a full state. Well, in real life, Japan had a big presence on the continent. I think it's hinted at that there are at least a couple of towns controlled by the Mugen on the northern border. They do mention that the Mugenese have territory on the northern border, or they have other territories around the continent. I don't know if there's a map included in... Yes, there is. I can look. Okay, I got a map. The interesting thing is, on her website, she posts the map, and she posts, but that looks like... No, it's not. She's like, but that really looks like... No, it's not. It's like, is she trying to hide the fact that this is Japan? So, there are Federation trading outposts on the edge of Horse Province.
Alright. So that's where everything went down.
Yes.
So war breaks out. Is the end of that huge spiel.
Yeah, there's an escalating conflict coming down from the north.
And Seingard is the capital, but I believe the other capital, Golan Nis, that's the war capital, is that right? It's more well defended?
Yeah.
So the aristocrats and the empress, they all evacuate Seingard, and they head to Golan Nis in the south, leaving behind the soldiers and the students, except for the first-year students, to fortify the city and defend it. Rin, I believe she's in her 4th or 3rd year by now. It's her second to last before graduating.
So the conflict continues to escalate until the point where the Mugenese are making for Seingard. And while Seingard is a well-fortified city, it is likely that it is going to fall. The Mugenese have brought a huge invasion force, and it is well-equipped to assault this fortress. all of the academy students that are able to fight are being prepared to fight. The ones that haven't, or the ones that are not prepared to fight, are evacuating. And Rin is now in the uncomfortable position of seeing war firsthand. She's given a post along with her fellow students, and the invasion begins. Boy, what a siege.
One for the ages.
One for the ages. Yeah, I don't want to go into too much detail about the full play-by-play, but a few of the main things to take away. Rin and Jiang have a disagreement over how to use their shaman powers. Jiang says that under no circumstances is Rin to call on the gods to aid her in this fight. It is not worth... No country is worth what the gods will do to this world. Rin cannot accept that. So she is trying to obey her master, but she can't watch her country burn knowing that she could do something about it. When one of the gates falls in Signgard and the Muganese military starts to pour through, Rin rushes to the defense and finds that basically everyone is down. The only people left are her and her nemesis, Nezha. But a common enemy does wonders to resolve differences, and Rin and Nezha fight back to back, and for quite a while hold the gate. But eventually, a video game style boss comes through. He's right out of Dark Souls or Sekiro. He's a Muganese general, and he's in full armor. Is he on horseback?
I think he starts out on horseback. Yes.
Yeah, and he laughs and makes fun of his men at how they were held back by two pups, and he's gonna take care of this, and boy does he! These two that just held off wave after wave of men, they fight this guy, and he beats Rin down and beats Nezha down and stabs him twice with a halberd. And Rin, seeing Nezha go down, she finally pops her opium and ascends to the Pantheon. And
but you're forgetting something.
What am I forgetting?
You did this last time.
Oh no.
Zhang actually arrives first.
Oh, he does.
Unleashes all kinds of demons and craziness.
Yeah.
And I believe that causes the army outside of the video game boss to flee or be routed.
I think he actually kills them. And I think he does a number on the general as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he defeats the army, but no one man can defeat this general.
Yes. Well, no, he has a second phase.
Yeah, that's right. I think he sticks his hand up through the rubble. Is that right?
Yeah, it's something really dramatic like that. So, what? Does Zhang pass out?
Zhang disappears. They don't really explain that part. He just disappears.
Yeah, okay. So Zhang shows up. He uses his shaman powers to interfere. So, game's on. And Rin goes up to the Pantheon, calls down the Phoenix, and she literally lights on fire. And fire just pours out of her. And this general tries to attack her, and Rin melts him.
Quite literally.
Yeah.
She melts his armor. She melts the flesh off of his bone.
And then does Rin pass out?
Yes.
Okay.
Rin passes out.
Okay.
Rin wakes up in jail, essentially. And the Empress is actually there, where she mentions that they put Zhang away. And she also tells Rin that she knows what she is. And Rin finds the truth. She is, in fact, another Spearly.
Yeah, boy, that came out of nowhere.
That was weird.
Yeah. I kind of forgot. but she doesn't. Well, I guess this is maybe an ongoing mystery in the series. 'Cause she doesn't really look like a Spearly.
Well, later on, she gets the crimson red eyes at the end of the book.
You're right. Yes, you're right. I forgot about that. Yeah, I guess Rin's a Spearly. I didn't see that coming. Well, then I guess Spearlies are just Nikarans? Like, because Rin, okay, they mentioned she has slightly darker complexion, but she passes for a Nikaran perfectly fine, so they are like...
Yeah, that's why I was thinking maybe they were an allegory for Korea, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't... Maybe
It's
there's no...
it's
maybe
not a
it's just an
one-to-one.
Yeah.
Alright. So they decide that Rin is going to be part of that 13th Division, and hey, now that guy out on the boat, the Shadow guy, now that he's dead, who is the commander but Alton? The Muganese are rethinking their strategy. They realize this isn't going to be a quick war where they march into Seingard, take it over, and Nakara is theirs. So they're rethinking their strategy, and the 13th Division is supposed to go relieve a siege, and I cannot recall, what was the name of that city? I just have Port City in the notes.
Coeur d'Alene.
Coeur d'Alene. So the Muganese are attempting to land here, and their job is basically, I guess it's not to relieve the siege, it's to bunker down and hold out as long as possible. That will allow more and more lines of defense to be placed in between Coeur d'Alene and the capital of Golan Nice.
Yeah, so strategically speaking, with Rin successfully holding Seingard is bordered by mountains on either side. I don't think we made that clear. So the layout of the country is such that while Mugen controls a lot of the northern territory, they can't come south from their northern outposts without taking Seingard. So as long as Seingard stands, they're safe from northern attack. Coeur d'Alene is positioned on the east coast of Nikara. And the island, the Mugen archipelago, is just a little bit east of that. It's a short boat ride from mainland Mugen to Coeur d'Alene. And Coeur d'Alene, if they could take it intact, it makes an excellent port. It is I believe, the main international port of Nikara. So it has
That is correct.
all the facilities they would need.
I think that is where they mentioned the Bolognians
Yes.
as having a foreign quarter there, as well as the Hesperian.
So a number of divisions are assigned to defend Coeur d'Alene, not just the 13th.
Correct. So I believe they said it was either under siege or they were landing troops on the beaches to prepare to take the town itself. That's what I got from it. Did you get anything different when you initially heard about this town?
When I initially heard, I think I got the impression that the town was currently besieged.
Okay.
No,
Yeah, I thought different thing. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I got the impression that the town was currently besieged from the east. That they had lost control of the bay. So the western road leading into the town was still open for them to take. And they can get in through the west, but the international quarter and all the foreign ships have basically been evacuated, and they were evacuated because the invasion was beginning. That's where I thought we were when Rin comes to Coeur d'Alene.
Yeah, and they keep mentioning siege, I remember, and
Siege is the wrong word for it.
yes. This whole part is a little confusing, and you seem to think it was an editorial problem rather than a writing problem.
I think so. This is where part 1 and part 2 are a little bit different. They're a little bit different in the real history that they draw their inspiration from. Part 1 is heavily inspired by, I think, the 14th, 15th century state of China. And Part 2 is very heavily influenced by the Shanghai conflict in World War II. And so
Yes.
admittedly, this could be a problem just with me. I admittedly don't know a lot about battles that took place in 14th, 15th century China. So this is probably just me coming at it from a Lord of the Rings style fantasy fan, where I'm thinking of like castles and fortresses and things like that. When I think siege, I think there's an area that is totally blockaded by an enemy and no supplies get in and no people get out.
Yes, and that's what I think of as well. And that is not what this is.
Yeah, the situation in Coeur d'Alene, I guess we'll discuss it right now before we get to like a lot of Rin's actions in Coeur d'Alene. But the situation in Coeur d'Alene is that a certain portion of the city is controlled by the Muganese, and a certain portion of the city is controlled by the Nikara. And we are engaged in house-to-house urban warfare. And there are still civilians attempting to live in this town, which is similar to what happened in the Shanghai conflict. And the reason I thought there might be an editing issue is because the author mentions in the acknowledgments at the end that she specifically thanks one of her writers for identifying a number of inconsistencies. And I think maybe one of those inconsistencies was an earlier draft where the technology of the world was slightly different. While I do have an issue, the more I've thought about it, the more I'm willing to forgive. I think the error is on me for assuming what a siege would be like.
I, on the other hand, am going to continue my stance of I don't know what age we're in, and I don't know what level of technology that we have.
I do agree, but not based on this.
Okay, fair enough. They did use, around this time, the phrase that they lined up prisoners and shot them. That's not traditionally something you see.
So that, I think, that's
bows.
an editing mistake.
I agree that is likely an editing error.
I definitely...
And that a better phrase could have been used.
If I could talk to RF Kuang, I would ask her if there was a version of this book where the Muganese had guns.
Yeah, let's get her on the air. I'm sure she'd love to be on this podcast.
She's well above us. But if I could ask her, I would ask if there was a version that had guns, because I get that vibe.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all.
I was a little surprised by the urban warfare, and it took me longer than it probably should have to realize that we were doing house-to-house fighting. I kept waiting for the Muganese to show up. I didn't realize they were already there.
Yes, exactly. I didn't realize they were there until a later chapter. She passed by dead Muganese soldiers, and I was like, what are they doing? Shouldn't they be on the outside of the walls?
It took me too long to realize that, but if I went back and reread it, I think maybe that's on me. Do you want to talk about the X-Men?
Yeah, I would love to talk about the X-Men. I personally, and I know you hated this.
I did.
Yeah. You hated this. I really liked the super-powered Black Ops. The X-Men.
The X-Men. So the 13th Division is made up of a variety of shaman. Each shaman channels one god, and each god has a different shtick. The Phoenix, understandably, fire. There's a monkey guy who's got big old arms and hits real hard. There's a boar guy who also hits real hard. There's a guy who's just a bucket of water.
Who is the guy with the weird rake thing?
That's the boar guy, isn't it?
It might be.
I think that's the boar
Yeah.
guy.
I think you're right. There's a woman who can control birds to scout.
Yeah, she can kind of like see through their eyes.
There's a guy who is a pyrotechnics master. He's the only one on the group who is not a shaman.
Oh yeah, there's a child who's a pyrotechnics master. Yeah,
Yes.
he's like 10. But yeah, basically the each shaman
Healer? Yeah.
Oh yeah, there is a healer. You're right.
He dishes out the drugs.
Yeah. Well, there's a pharmacist.
Yes.
So the characters that make up the squad, it is fun. It's a little bit more lighthearted than the previous part of the book. Rin gets along with these people a lot better, but Rin is also since Seingard, Rin is having difficulty channeling the Phoenix. Every time
she's having performance issues.
You are damn determined to get that joke in.
Anyway.
No, she's having a hard time channeling the Phoenix. And it's kind of implied that she might not be having a difficult time channeling the Phoenix. It might just be that she's starting to question whether or not she should channel the Phoenix. Alton channels the Phoenix, no problem. So Rin's kind of pretty much functioning as a normal human amongst these superheroes. The reason I didn't like it as much is because I did not like the boxing in of shamanism. Just a few chapters ago at this point, Zhang is teaching her all about these expanded mental states and all this cool stuff, and Zhang can do all these manipulations of nature, and he opens a portal and all these things. And now we find out, okay, everybody's got one power, and that's your power, and we gotta learn teamwork. We're basically the X-Men. In fact, 2 of you are the Phoenix. I don't know why they can only channel one god. That doesn't make sense to me. Maybe in the future they'll channel more than one, but I don't know why they can only channel one god, and I don't know why channeling a god gives you a superpower, but also, like, no spiritual growth. All of these people are not even religious. There's just no spirituality to this whatsoever, and that's kind of the point. The author is not forgetting about the spiritualism. I will say that. She has not forgotten that the spiritualism is supposed to be important, and it's kind of implied that these guys are taking the wrong approach to shamanism, but it just kind of undermined everything Zhang taught her, that, like, these people could even be shaman. Like, I would expect that you would have to have a certain depth of spirituality to reach the Pantheon in the first place. At least that's how Zhang made it seem. Like, Rin had to meditate and train for years to reach the Pantheon, and it seems like these guys just kind of do it. Like, they get high and they do it. And I thought that was kind of lame.
It definitely does not mesh with what came before. You're right on that.
I like the characters that I like some of the characters that make up the 13th Division. I especially like the Seer, who comes in a little bit later. I like him a lot, actually. But he also kind of seems to get it. And that's why I say, like, this is not a criticism of the author or of the writing, really, because there are consequences to using shamanism this way. They're just not readily apparent for the next few hundred pages. And so it was a little frustrating to read.
The only real consequence you notice is that the monkey guy is starting to look like a monkey, and he's starting to go into bouts of uncontrolled rage as his god is taking over.
Yeah, they do foreshadow that channeling the gods for an extended period of time leads to the destruction of your own personality. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Alton's first operation?
Okay, so Alton is under a lot of pressure this whole time. They're the outcasts. The 13th Division is not well liked by anyone. They're regarded as freaks, and the pyrotechnic expert blew up a building prior to Alton and Rin coming to the city, which only makes them less liked. So Alton decides he needs to prove his worth, and he tells Rin that they are not an army. They're a small squad, and so they have to operate like a small squad. So he devises a plan. He uses, I don't remember her name, so I'm just going to call her based on her power. Bird Girl gets intel from her birds that the Muganese are going to deploy some boats. Is that upriver? Is that what they were doing to resupply themselves?
I think what they're trying to do, they're trying to get supplies in, or if they're trying to get supplies and troops into the river to get behind the lines. But the point is, the Muganese are bringing in shipments under the cover of night of men and supplies.
Yeah, they're up to no good.
Oh, those Muganese!
Yeah, so Alton devises a plan that essentially boils down to let's trap them and kill them. So he keeps an eye on where they are at all times using the birds, and they have a series of signals, and they burn the boats, and the Muganese bail out of their ships into the river. They try to swim to shore, and as they try to swim to shore, Boar Man and Monkey Boy are on the shore, on the bank, killing people as they come up.
I enjoy your descriptions.
Thank you. On the other side are Rin and Alton. Rin attempts to summon the Phoenix to kill these people, but she can't, so Alton takes over, and he brutally slaughters all the survivors, including the ship's captain commits seppuku before he can be burned alive. How was that?
It was really good, except for the part where you forgot every character's name.
Do you remember their names?
No, I don't. I wish I did. They just don't do much, I'm afraid. Kara is the bird girl.
Okay.
I think that's probably the only one worth mentioning. Chagan is the seer. But no, that's a fine description. The main thing he demonstrates is that by working together, they demonstrated that they could do something that only they could do. It required their specific set of skills to accomplish this task.
And I guess now is a good time to mention that they never do anything like that ever again.
They never work that well together again, that's for sure. After the success of his mission, the Muganese send envoys out to negotiate surrender. Now, you might see where this is going. They mean the Nikara surrender, and the Nikara think the Muganese are gonna.
Muganese.
Yeah, it's an old chestnut there.
What would they have done if they said yes? Would they have been like, "Oh shit, well,
they probably wouldn't.
We're about to blow you up."
Well, they probably wouldn't have blown them up because then, they didn't blow up very many people in the scheme of things. There's a disagreement among the commanders about how best to receive said envoys. June thinks that they should just kill them because, the Muganese can't be trusted. Just kill them. Alton thinks that perhaps they should invite them in and hear what they have to say. The envoys, for their part, bring a peace offering of salt and sugar because the town has been deprived of spices for some time now. The envoys demand the surrender of the Nikarans. That is obviously unacceptable to the Nikarans. And when the Nikarans refuse, the envoys detonate the pile of salt, which it turns out was saltpeter. I don't think saltpeter is explosive by itself, but maybe there was something else in there. Alton bears the blame for inviting them in and insisting that everybody had to trust them. As Nate mentioned, shooting the envoy is also a war crime. Blowing up a peace negotiation, that's a war crime.
And there was no other option.
There were many other options. One of which was leave that outside till we have a chance to look at it. Yeah, Alton, he made a naive call. And his inexperience got some people killed, and it really undermined all the goodwill the 13th had just built for themselves, and Alton psychologically never recovers from this. And this is when it sort of comes out. It actually took me, again, longer than it probably should have to realize that Alton is an opium addict.
I did not realize that until she told me.
Yeah.
It was very well done.
Yeah, that part made a ton of sense. It fit really well. So Alton just descends into an opium-fueled delirium. He becomes increasingly abusive towards Rin because she can't or won't summon the Phoenix. And yeah, the state of the 13th sort of just degrades, and all progress towards taking back the city stalls, and we just kind of exist in a limbo, watching Alton's mental state deteriorate. During the siege, an old friend comes to join the defenders, and that is Nezha, who was stabbed through the torso all the way through, like through his spine, and he was not expected to live, and if he did live, he was not expected to walk again. But Nezha's here, and he's fine. And he's really friendly towards Rin. That back-to-back fighting seems to have completely changed their relationship. They get along very well. And Nezha kind of is the one to wake Rin up to the fact that Alton is going too far. And Rin is defensive of him at first. But there is a point where, in a discussion with Alton, she contradicts him in front of his troops. Alton insists that she remain behind so that they can talk one-on-one. And the conversation gets pretty heated, and Alton slaps Rin across the face, which is a bit of a trigger for Rin. And Rin channels the Phoenix. And Alton channels the Phoenix in defense, and they go at it for a little bit with their Phoenix measuring contest. And Alton's Phoenix is bigger than Rin's Phoenix. So Rin has to back down, but Alton's very pleased that he finally got her to do it. And he's like, so that's what it takes, huh? She is starting to wake up to the fact that he is just not what she thought he was. She had this idea of him as a great leader who really cared about his men, who would do anything for his troops. And he's just a broken person. Now, do you want to talk about the face stealer?
I figured you might talk about it since you're the horror expert.
Okay. During the scene,
I assume. Did you like this? Sorry, I don't mean to.
Did
cut you off
I like the face?
do. Yeah. Did you like the face steal?
I'll tell you what. Ask me that after I describe it.
Okay.
So during the siege, there's a chapter that's almost like a side story, and it deals with a monster that is attacking a civilian section of the city. There's hundreds of civilians just running for safety, and the army is not really sure what's going on. Every person they stop and question says that there is this monster that can look like people you know, and it's killing people and like ripping their faces off. Rin and Nezha volunteer to go investigate, and it does wind up being something like right out of a horror movie. They see a little girl who is just suspicious as hell, and Nezha catches her in like a little verbal trap, and she turns on him and becomes this monster, and she starts choking him. And when Rin tries to pull the thing off Nezha, it takes on the face of her adopted baby brother, and Rin becomes sort of mystified and can't deal with it. And then Nezha pulls it off again, and then Nezha, like, they go back and forth a little bit. Eventually Rin attacks it despite it looking like her brother, and then it morphs again, and it turns into Alton. And Alton, is trying to talk Rin out of attacking him, and Rin really mentally believes this is Alton, and then kills him anyway. And in Rin's mind, she's crossed a line now where she murdered Alton, and she's kind of okay with that. Now, as to this chapter's significance to the story, this is the first time we've ever encountered a supernatural entity outside of the gods themselves. Like, this is the first time a supernatural being has ever physically manifested in the world. And it's suggested that this creature escaped when Jiang opened that portal in Sign Guard. So you had asked me before if I liked this chapter.
Yes.
I liked this chapter quite a bit.
You would.
I liked it so much that I covered it very quickly because I'm kind of reluctant to spoil it. I wish there were more chapters like it.
They definitely should have gone with more like it or not in the book, because it's the only chapter like it, and it doesn't have any direct impact on the main conflict of the story or the rest of the story at all, actually.
Yeah, in isolation, it is a very strange addition. Like I said, it's implied that the Zhang's abilities allow him to open a portal that unleashes all kinds of supernatural creatures to attack his enemies, and that he's lost control over this one. It's foreshadowed a little bit, but it really does, in a book that's almost 600 pages long, to devote 20 pages and like 20 pages only to this monster attack. It's a little odd and a little out of place. This is why I think there are definitely earlier versions of this book that were very different, because there are just a couple of little pieces here and there that really stand out as, this is a cool idea. I see why you didn't want to get rid of it, but it doesn't work.
I agree. It's possible that this is something that's touched upon more in the sequels, but in this book, it did not have a place as is.
Let me ask you this, because I can almost feel it just trying to describe part 2. Do you feel like part 2 just dragged a bit?
I feel like part 2 dragged a lot. I enjoyed the X-Men part. I know you hated it. But aside from that, I can't really think much about part 2. There's not a lot going on between the big moment, the ship burning, and the end of part 2.
It does capture the extreme boredom punctuated by, oh my god, what the fuck's going on, that an actual siege must be like.
Fair enough.
I should say I didn't hate the X-Men part. I just think it was a missed opportunity. I think it just boxed in shamanism too much.
And I can see that.
I don't understand why a shaman can only channel one god. Why can't... I guess they do describe it as the gods being jealous or something like that they don't want to... The gods are trying to manifest physically. They want to take over bodies. For as long as this book is, surprisingly little page time is given toward the fantasy aspects. And that is nowhere more apparent than in part 2.
Yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that both of us think part 2 is the weakest of the 3 parts.
And the middle of a story usually is. It's never as exciting as the beginning or the end.
Right.
They needed something to do to establish who the shaman were and what they can do, and Rin needed to join the 13th and meet some other shaman who have different philosophies than Zhang. I just think this is one place where I think it really felt to me like the story was not allowed to go in the direction it would naturally go. If you look at part 1 and you just write the story from there, I don't think it becomes part 2. I think part 2 was a case of a particular event in history that was maybe relevant in an earlier version of the draft. I think this was a case of, I want to do this battle in my book. And so I put it in my book. Even though that's not really where it was going. I don't know. Do you feel that way? Or am I just way off base?
I don't know. I think part of it is the difficulty in adapting a modern day conflict and making that into a conflict from like 500 years ago instead, and then also trying to incorporate magic and philosophy and religion into it. And yeah, I could see that she wanted to do the Sino-Japanese War. And actually, this is what I was saying. When you asked me if it relied too much on tropes to get started, I said yes, because it felt like it was setting up like a hero's journey, like Star Wars, light-hearted fantasy.
I don't think it was ever lighthearted.
Well, okay, yeah, not light-hearted. They definitely had hard drugs in the first chapter. But it was supposed to be kind of like a realistic adventure. And then it morphed into something completely different by the end. And that's why I thought, yeah, they overused tropes because I was expecting one thing, but the author clearly wanted something different. So I think the author's intent was part 2 and part 3, but she needed a way to get there. And I think you're right. I think part 1 does not gel as well with the other 2 parts as it should.
I don't want to just shit on part 2 for like 20 minutes. But this is the final thing I'll say about part 2. You go from a very fast-paced part 1, where we are literally covering 6 years in one part. And then you go to part 2, and it grinds to a halt. And you introduce, coupled with like the weird approach to shamanism, I don't feel like the shamanism is done consistently. And it's just like a period of a couple of months happen during this, and this is really like the slow part of the book where Rin builds relationships with Alton to discover that Alton's not who she thought he was, and she builds a relationship with Neza, and he turns out to be a much better person than she thought he was, but they're not doing anything. like it's just, they're not given anything to do beyond that one thing. She just watches a man crumble to pieces and be abusive towards her, and it's not very enjoyable. And I think that's where it's like, I can't decide, does the siege not work because it's the wrong time period, or because it's a weird battle to choose? I don't even really know if that's why it's not working. I think it's just the characters don't have enough to do, and their relationships are just so brutal that you have a lot of time to sit back and think about what is going on in a way you don't have in the first part. I find myself, when things are moving that slowly and when people are having those kinds of like relationship problems that are so frustrating, I just find myself thinking of ways to solve the problem. And being frustrated that the characters are not doing what I'm thinking. And that could be a problem with me, or that could be a problem with the book. I don't know. It wasn't like it was very hard to get through. I think I'm given an impression that it was more miserable than it was.
No, we both liked this book.
Yeah, we did. This is too negative.
This is not Heir to the Empire.
I had more fun shitting on Heir to the Empire, because I think this book's a tragedy. I mean, really, like, it's it's designed to be a bummer.
Well, yeah.
And so
it's a character's descent further and further into bad shit.
Yeah. So, yeah, it bummed me out, I guess. Maybe that's my problem. Like, maybe it's just doing its job too well. I think that might be what we're experiencing a little bit, is that in the first part, there's optimism. Rin has something she's trying to do. She's taking steps. She's making progress. She's finding hope. And then in this part, we realize that is not the kind of story we are in. Rin is not going on a fun hero's journey. She's Darth Vader.
Yes.
Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about Chagan?
Yeah. Chagan.
Chagan. There's no N.
Is there not?
No, there's an N at the end.
Yeah,
See?
Chagan.
Yeah, but you keep saying Chongan.
So,
The only love interest in this book.
yeah, I did not get that the first time around.
I am.
Chagan
Yeah.
is the second in command of the 13th Division, and apparently a very well done romance between him and Alton.
Okay, let me pause it. So, this is my fan theory.
No, I think you're right.
I don't know if I'm right because I think on Goodreads there's a Q&A about the book, and one of the questions she's asked is, are there any romances in this book? And she says no. There are situations that maybe could be romances. I don't think she's interested in writing romantic relationships at all. So the fact that there seems to be some attraction between Rin and Neja, I don't know if that's intentional. Now, I do personally, I definitely think there is an off-screen romance between Chagan and Alton, and
I think you're right.
yeah. I think as we get into part 3, I will show further evidence of said relationship.
Chagan is the seer of the team, and he's second in command. He doesn't channel a specific deity, but he can still go to the pantheon. He considers himself the most powerful shaman in existence, and he can tell fortunes. Does that pretty much cover what he's got going on?
So this is when I started coming back around. Like, I like Chagan a lot. I like the seer thing he does. When he journeys to the pantheon, he communes with deities and spirits. And he can do some kind of like I Ching style readings and fortune telling, and he's very good at interpreting them. I think Chagan's personal philosophy on how to be a shaman is more in line with Zhang's than with Alton or Rin's. And I think that's why I like him so much. And that's why I was saying earlier that I don't think that Kuang is endorsing Rin's brand of shamanism because Chagan is the most powerful shaman.
All the divisions here they're trying to take an objective. They're fighting street by street, and they keep running into strong points, and they're costing a lot of men.
They're, again, doing house-to-house fighting. When Mugen unleashes a weapon that they have never seen...
It's mustard gas.
Thank you. Yeah, that was... I was going to describe it with a little more build-up, but yeah, it's mustard gas.
Yes, the Muganese have developed mustard gas ahead of guns, and they are using it on the Nakaran. And it caused a mass panic. The Nakaran's assault is immediately halted. They are routed. Neja falls behind. Rin wants to save him, but Alton drags her away. And in fact, we learn later, Alton goes back in to capture a Mugen soldier, but he does not help Neja at all. Now that Chagan is here, Rin initially, okay, so he offers to help her with her performance issue with the Phoenix, and initially she turns him down, but after all the crap that happens in part 2, she gives in, she asks for his help, he travels with her to the Pantheon, and they run into the strange woman from part 1, and Chagan attempts to banish her, and it doesn't work out, so they flee. And they flee to, I can't remember what it was described as. It's like his interdimensional fortune house.
They teleport. So they teleport to some kind of space, some kind of refuge where Chagan goes once a month. He can have his fortune read. I think what they're doing is the I Ching with the hexagrams.
Yes.
So
yeah,
yeah
hexagrams were involved.
Yeah, there's a table with all the hexagrams on it, and you can cast your lot and get your fortune read.
So the important things to note here are someone dear to them has betrayed them, and Jesus, that startled me.
Trying to put a little theatrics into the podcast, Nate.
and the other important thing is that they ascertain that the Muganese army has moved around them, and they assume that that means that the Muganese are heading for Golanice.
No, they don't.
So, yes, they do.
Is it Golanice or is it Seingard?
Golanice. Seingard is no longer in the story.
Sugar. You're right.
Yes. So they believe that they're going for Golanice, and Alton confirms this by torturing a Muganese soldier until he gives up the good.
Arguably the most productive thing he's done in chapters. I mean,
yes.
like,
yeah. I don't even think that's arguable. That is the most important thing he's done in quite some time. And that concludes part 2 with them abandoning the city to go to Golanice and try to warn them of what is coming. Any final thoughts on this part?
No, I don't really know if there's anything more to talk about. This part, like, not a lot happened.
Yeah, it's the connective tissue between the first part and the third part, and the third part couldn't really exist without this connecting it, but yeah, it's a little rough.
Do you remember how the Muganese got past them?
They sailed their ship south, and then they found a mountain pass, I think is the explanation.
They didn't, yeah, so they thought the mountain pass was a secret.
Yes, they learned the secret of the mountain pass, which I guess now that I think about it makes perfect sense once more is revealed in part 3.
Yes. Yeah, so that's logically consistent. So we talked pretty much about how we thought part 2 was the weakest, but I think we really need an opportunity to talk about the things we liked in part 2. So was there anything that really stood out to you as
the X-Men?
So yeah,
I already told you, I love that part. That chapter was my jam. People still say my jam. That chapter was my shit.
They don't say that. I don't think that's been said since Gwen Stefani in 1996. Do you know what I think would have made the Face Stealer thing work better?
What's that?
If they'd sent Rin, Nezha, and the team. Like, if they'd sent the 13th to deal with the Face Stealer.
Yeah.
If they were like, hey, look, there's some weird magical stuff going on, get them in there. And then it would have fit a little bit better, and you would have had another X-Men scene.
Yeah, I would have loved that, because it involves more of the X-Men.
So, how would you say that this magic system compares to other magic systems?
Well, it's not a hard magic system. It doesn't have really rigid rules, because Chagan and Zhang can seemingly manipulate, well, I don't know if Chagan can, but I assume he can, like the little tiny manipulations of the natural world. They can do things that humans can't without necessarily calling a god.
What do you think of the gods?
Ooh, this gets into my question of who gives you the power.
Does the wand choose you?
Do we give power to the gods, or do they give power to us? Because it's implied that gods cannot interfere, really, with the mortal world. They need a vessel.
Why do you think each person can only channel one god?
You know, I really don't know. There are 64 gods, at least. I think that was a hard number. And the Spearleys seem to have an affinity for the Phoenix. But does that mean only Spearleys can channel the Phoenix? Does that mean Spearleys can't channel another god?
Do you think the gods are going to be like the top tier, do you think there is a plane?
Super god?
Well, not super god, but do you think there is?
His name is Jesus.
Okay, you Hesperian. Interesting thought I have is I think the gods are these beings that are, above humanity for sure. But I almost wonder if they're not a distraction from the end goal. Because, like, when we think of a god as Westerners, we kind of think of the omnipotent, omniscient father figure god. Whereas Zhang is a very wise man, and he doesn't want to bring the gods to Earth. He'll seek their wisdom, he'll ascend to the pantheon, but he doesn't want to use their power. And it seems like the gods also kind of want to make things worse. Like, they don't seem to be a force of good. They just seem to be a force of nature. And when they're not in perfect balance, they throw everything off. So I almost kind of wonder if the gods are like... The gods seem to exist in perfect balance, and that seems to me to indicate that they are not...
Like they're an extension of nature.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not above nature, they are nature. And to that extent, is the phoenix always the phoenix? Or is it the phoenix when a Spearly goes looking for it? Because that's what a Spearly has decided that part of nature is.
That's actually a really good question. And I wonder if that will ever get answered.
I don't know. So I think there's a good chance that could get answered. I hope in future books she dives into the spirituality of this a bit.
Do you have any other questions that you'd like to ask?
Do you think it's a little racist that she describes all Hesperians as looking exactly like me? And do you think her description of me was perhaps a little mean? We're not all pale, covered in fur, and orange-haired. I mean, I am, but not everyone.
All right. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. That is part 2 of the Poppy War. Like I said, 2 weeks from now, we will be doing part 3. So you still have time to read the book if you want to get in on the discussion and read along with us. And the next book in the series, if you want to get a jump start on that, is Make Love, The Bruce Campbell Way by Bruce Campbell. Good night. I remember the guy who's not there yet, the seer. His name is Chungin, I think.
God, no, do not say Chungin. His name's Chungus?